Very much, David. I would like to to welcome, first of all, everybody, and to thank the Wiltshire Museum and particularly the director, David Dawson, first of all, for what you said, for the study we had in 2018, if I remember well, and also the Prehistoric Society for the kind invitation to present our work here today. And of course, warm thanks to Alison Sheridan, Barbara Armbruster, and Chris Landis for accepting to be the panelist in the discussion. We're looking forward to hear to your feedback on a comparative work we have tried to do between Mycenaean goldwork and Wessex and Armorican goldwork, but the second part we are not, of course, specialists. So it's a great pleasure and great honor for us to be here and listen to your comments. Let me share my screen. Okay, I believe that you can see my screen now, yes? Dear David, can I ask if you can see my screen only to be sure?
Hello, yes, we're fine.
Excellent, thank you very much. So, my name is Nikolas Papadimitriou. I'm an archaeologist and I work at the Institute of Classical Archaeology at the University of Heidelberg. And this is, I am one of 4 parts in this presentation. I will introduce you the rest in a second. We will speak about a Mycenaean goldworking technique, which seems to have parallels in Brittany, Armoric, northwest France, and the area of Wessex, southern England. The Mycenaean culture flourished in southern mainland Greece, the area of Peloponnese, between the 17th and the 12th century, in the local late Bronze Age. Famous sites, Mycenae, Pylos, Dendra, and other sites. But apart from this core area, it had also a wider cultural influence all over the Aegean Sea and the Western Anatolia down to the Dodecanese Road and Crete. Now, Mycenaean culture is mostly known for its art as well as its early literature, the Linear B tablets. It was a very prolific culture in producing great art. Among them, goldwork was a landmark. From the very beginning, from the 16th, the 17th, the 16th century, in the shaft graves of Mycenae, where we do have this unique face masks. Here is the so-called agamemnon, or these inlaid daggers with inlaid decoration, and also in later times, goldwork was original.
Excuse me, Nico.
Yes.
We don't see the image right. It's completely blurry and flu. Could
Really?
you do something? We even can't read the letters. Yes, it's better.
Yes, it's okay.
Okay. I don't know how to hide these. No problem. Okay, I leave this on the top because I don't know how to hide this bar. So, goldwork was always a landmark for Mycenaean art, and it was quite original from the very beginning. This is quite diverse. This is why the problem now is that, in 2012, together with Dr. Eleni Konstantinidis Ivridou, a curator at the National Archaeological Museum in Athens, Maria Kondaki, who is a conservator in the same museum, and Akis Goumas, a goldsmith and researcher of ancient technologies, who is with us today, and he will speak to you after me. We decided to start a project in order to study the techniques of the Mycenaean goldsmith. So a technological mostly study that combines archaeological observation, microscopic studies, archaeometry, and experimentation. So we have published quite a few papers on various techniques, and our latest preoccupation is with a technique identified by Christos Tundas, a pioneer of Aegean archaeology, when he was excavating the chamber tomb cemeteries of Mycenae here back in the 1890s. What Tundas found in one of the tombs was one dagger with a gold-coated hilt. And this is not unusual. In rich Mycenaean tombs, or in rich Minoan tombs as well, we find quite a few gold-sheathed hilts, but they are coated with gold leaf. Now, what Tundas found is that this dagger was not covered by leaf, but by thousands of these tiny L-shaped gold articles. I will call them gold bars from now on, which have a shaft which is around 3 millimeters long and a nail which is less than 1 millimeter long. So they covered the entire surface with this kind of gold bars, and then they decorated with this engraved motifs, as you can see. Tundas was so impressed by this stitching, it looked like stitching actually on a garment, that he paralleled this with embroidery, and he called this gold embroidery, quite fitting term, as you will see. After more than 100 years, the technique is attested only in 6 sites and 11 contexts, most of them corresponding to some of the wealthiest Mycenaean tombs, including the shaft graves of Mycenae, the ones excavated by Henrik Schliemann, and as you know, this is one of the wealthiest burial assemblages in world archaeology. The tholos tomb of Dendra, one of the very few undisturbed burial contexts in Mycenaean Greece, which has produced goldwork, ostrich eggs, everything, among which a sword decorated with this technique. Another tomb at Dendra, which has given the only complete bronze armor from the late Bronze Age, and the famous, recently discovered Griffin Warrior tomb at Pylos, excavated by Sari Stoker and Jack Davis, which I'm sure that you are all aware about, and here is the sword with this decoration. Now, all these contexts date between the 17th and the 15th century, but only at Mycenae, the whole chronological span is represented. The other sides, they have few examples and only specific periods. This technique, for most of the scholars who studied, they suggested some technical processes, and they proposed that it is a Mycenaean technique. That's a local technique, a Mycenaean invention. So our questions were how the objects were really decorated, what was the process, the scène opératoire, as we call them, and how was, whether the technique was local or borrowed from another culture. Now, from a typological point of view, it is interesting that this is a technique that is reserved for weapons. It is not encountered in jewelry or in the decoration of other objects like furniture, for example. It only occurs on swords and daggers. Now, we have to understand that the technique does not apply directly on the metal part of the weapon. It applies on the hilt plates and the pommel, which are made of organic material, bone, ivory, or sometimes wood. Okay. Another very interesting finding of our research is that the composition of the gold is almost pure, 99% plus gold, and only sometimes less. This is not a natural alloy. I mean, natural native gold is usually, it can be something like around 90, 92, 93%, but it always have quantities of silver and copper. So there is some kind of refining here, not the refining in the literal sense, but some kind of processing so that it can enrich the gold, and there are such techniques. The topic is very complex to discuss here. Now, the morphology of these the gold bars is, as we said, L-shaped, and they have these diagonal lines here, which are characteristic of the making technique. these pieces were made of a flat gold strip, which was then twisted until it became a wire. And we have always, these are unmistaken marks of this technique. Now, how these were arranged on the object. Here we're fortunate to have destroyed pieces, and destroyed pieces are a treasure for people studying technology. So this comes probably from somewhere here, from part of the weapon, and it looks perfectly like gold leaf from the top. But if we see from the side, from underneath, we see these nails protruding. And the interesting thing is that the nails are arranged in a zigzag formation. Okay, so not one next to the other. If we see another part from outside, we will see that only every second row gold bars are parallel, and in between they are placed in the mid-length of the other rows. So in other words, it is a brickwork technique. Now, how they were placed on the organic material, there are holes which were pre-drilled and very neatly organized. As Akis will explain later, this is a crucial part of the design, is a crucial part of the technique. And here you can see different levels of magnification. Here, very high magnifications, these perfectly round holes. Thankfully, we have these destroyed pieces and we can have sections. And here we can see how the gold bars were penetrating ivory in this case, which is hard material, and wood, which is less hard, but you can see how the gold gets inside the soft material. So it is very probable, because this is less than 1 millimeter nail, it was impossible to stay there without a kind of glue. So it is possible that a kind of glue, organic glue, was used. And in one tiny piece, we found this mark here. This may be the impression of a nail. Some soft material that retained the impression of the nail. The nail was later lost, and then was, petrified, fossilized like that. And in another piece in Copenhagen, we thank Elena Stamatatu for that, who did the examination of photographs, we find this greenish material, which is over the organic pommel and under the gold now has left, and has this curving line, perhaps an impression of the decorative process. Now, here we can see that these gold bars were connected. They were really amalgamated and they're burnished. On the top here, they are flat, but underneath they have this semicircular section. Okay, so they were pressed somehow from the top to become flat. And they became, that was a process that was done so well that you could hardly understand that this consists of different parts unless you see in these. And then for the decoration, close inspection shows that it was made by hand. There were no compasses or other technical devices. And also there is all the things here. They have a V shape or a U shape, so it's a quite sharp material. We can even see this in detached pieces. The motifs, the engraved motifs, as you can see here, these are two parts of a pommel, of two different pommels, and these are parts of the hilt. There were always spirals, running spirals, so curvilinear motifs. And as for the quantities, Dendra, Axel Persson, the Swedish excavator, found almost 5,000 gold particles next to a weapon, because the organic part disintegrates, of course, so only he found only the gold bars, and he suggested this was the amount that was needed. Perhaps this is a slight underestimation, perhaps a few more thousands were needed. So here, unfortunately, without sound, it's a pity, but if we have sound, you will not have good image. We will show you reconstruction we attempted only in a small part after all the microscopic examination and the archaeometric studies. And of course, when I say we, I mean Akis Goumas. The rest were just watching and taking the video. So what Akis is doing here is that he's using his custom-made tool made of bronze to cut gold stripes from a gold leaf. And then he heats the stripes in order to become soft and malleable, and he starts twisting them by hand. Twisting by hand produces a kind of wire which is not tight enough, as you can see here. So he needs to roll the wires between two hard surfaces to make them tighter. And in the next image, you see the difference. Next, he uses a bronze chisel, specially made as well, to cut these tiny pieces that will then become the L-shaped bars. And here you will see the dimension of this bar. Then he uses tweezers in order to bend them. All the tools are custom made, and tool making is a very important part in the process. And then he took a small piece of bone, cattle bone in this case, and he applied a kind of animal glue. He will tell you about this later. And after he applied this, he left it to dry for some hours. And then he used this pointed tool in order to drill holes on the glue and the bone. And after he finished the pattern of the holes, he started placing the short part, the nail, into the holes. And as you will see, it's extremely difficult to keep the bar in place because they go in many different directions. So he needs always to make corrections. And we have added this view in order to understand the size. The size is unbelievably small. This is a very high magnification, what you're seeing now. But it is interesting because you can see this more or less finished, what we did, and you see that they're rounded. So now in order to make them flat, he is using another tool, a burnisher, with which he presses on the gold bars, and he does half of the decoration in order to see the difference. And by doing this, he manages to amalgamate them a bit, not like the Mycenaeans, okay, who are not that good. And at the end, he's using this graver, bronze graver as well, first to mark each individual bar and then to engrave some lines. Now, Akis will speak about this later in more detail, and you ask. So this is what we believe that is the process, the chain operatoire, the chain of movements. Now we call this type of decoration type B style. This decoration that they cover the whole thing with gold and then they engrave the gold. And we call type B because there is an earlier style, type A style, where I'm putting this here, where the gold particles were used to create decorative motifs themselves. So here the bars were used one after the other in order to create a running spiral in single lines, double lines, or even triple lines. And as you can see here, sorry, they used as well L-shaped gold bars, but now they were placed one next to the other. They didn't have this brickwork arrangement. What is important and what I want you to remember is this image of this effect of a mosaic. It looks like a mosaic. It doesn't have a very precise shape, each of them, okay? And now here you can see the difference between type A gold bars and type B. Type A are smaller, shorter, and not standardized. Type B are extremely standardized, almost as if they come from industrial production. Now, context-wise, only at Mycenae we have more than 2 or 3 pieces, actually more than 10. All the other places they have only a few. And the technique first appears at Mycenae. It is invented or first introduced at Mycenae, and then slowly it appears in the next 2 centuries in other places, eventually sometimes in rich chamber tombs, which is a not that prestigious type of tomb. So our impression, because of the homogeneity of the technique and the fact that we have very few pieces, actually, very few examples, is that there were a few workshops or one workshop based at Mycenae that exported to other places. This is what we believe. Now, it is important to understand that this is a specialized workshop for making weapons. It's not a jewelry workshop. This is a technique that applies only on prestigious weapons. And already to make such a weapon, a goldsmith had to collaborate with a bronze worker. And in other prestigious weapons, we have the use of glass, or even we have the use of agate. So there were a lot of specialists involved in this work. And it is interesting that the gold embroidery technique in more than one examples occurs on the same weapons as the metal inlay decoration. So we have here a famous dagger with metal inlay, and in this part we have this piece of gold embroidery. So a lot of techniques were combined, and gold inlay has almost identical chronological and geographical distribution as gold embroidery. Now, the technique is observed is attested in the Peloponnese. We don't know it from Crete, which was a major, the other major cultural center in the Aegean, and we don't know it from the Eastern Mediterranean of this period. The only place which has similar examples is south of England and northwest France, the Wessex culture and the Armorican culture, so the British and the French early Bronze Age. Now, so when in 2014 we saw these publications in British newspapers, we were really amazed, not only because of this, mosaic arrangement which reminded us, but also because of these profiles, because that profile was so much like the profiles we have from Dendra. And this, then we said that we have to study this. We have also to study this because there is a very long tradition of scholarship dealing with the relations between Wessex and Mycenae already from the time of Stuart Pigot. And so we applied to the British School at Athens, and we got an award, and we managed to visit Wiltshire Museum and other museums, the Asmodean, as well as several museums in France. So let me change my, if I manage to do this, yes. Okay. And move to the next PowerPoint. So in this part of Europe, the technique is known as gold stud decoration in English and incrustation en or in French literature, mostly studied by Mike Corfield and Christian Elouer. I have to say that I am grateful to Mike Parker Pearson, who in a conference in 2015, I think, or 2016, he introduced Mike Corfield's work. That's an excellent work by both scholars. Now, the technique is attested mostly in northwest France. You can see here 11 contexts, 11 sites, and in 2 sites in England. Sorry. In England, the 2 sites are Bush Barrow, this, which you know very well. I don't need to introduce this to you, dating to the Wessex I phase of the Wessex culture, and having one of the wealthiest and certainly most famous assemblages of the early Bronze Age. The other, which is the Hammeldon Down tumulus, which was also very rich, but not so well preserved, and has produced these amber pommel with these gold stud decoration. Unfortunately, the pommel was lost in the Second World War. In France, the technique is attested in very large tumuli, 20 to 60 meters in diameter, usually with a central tomb. And these tumuli, most of them, they serve the same kind of assemblages, so they mainly have a lot of copper or bronze weapons and tools, mostly axes and daggers. Almost all of them, they have flint arrowheads, and in France, this is an emblem of status, of chiefly status. We'll come back to that. Several of them, they have gold or silver artifacts, and a few they have also amber. Now, flint arrowheads are considered as the major emblem of status in Armorican burials. And thanks to Clement Nikolas, who have studied them in very detail, we know very well the distribution typology, etc. And here, also by Nikolas, we have this map where shows and chart which shows that almost all the objects, 10 out of 12, with gold star decoration in France, they occur in tumuli with flint arrowheads, and which generally are considered chiefly burials, are the most wealthy burials, elite burials. Now, typologically, the technique occurs only on daggers of the Armorico British types, aimed one according to Gerloff's typology, and also in the Cammerton Snowhill type. I'm sorry, I'm not familiar with the typology. The best preserved example comes from the site of Kernon End, Plouvorne, in Finistère, and it was excavated by Jacques Priard, who he two crossed daggers, and in the area of the handle, these three lines, triple line of gold studs was preserved, which actually followed the outline of the handle and the outline of the rivets. And this is something that we see in several other examples. So this decoration really marked the outline of the handle. Sometimes there were more elaborate decoration, but that was a standard. Okay, there are, however, other designs and other motifs, rectilinear here, not curvilinear as in the Aegean, so single or multiple chevrons, zigzags, and please remember this because we'll see it also in Bush Barrow. All of them are tiny. All of them are less than 1 centimeter or 2 centimeters, 1 by 1, let's say. Tiny pieces because they were mostly made of wood. Okay, so they're not very well preserved. And in some cases, we have this very dense placement of the gold studs. In other cases, this is very interesting, at the Ars Moleia Museum from St. Fiacre, we have a less dense placement, but clear intentional use of differently colored studs, which means different alloys. Here probably is an alloy richer in silver, and this is an alloy richer in copper. That's a really impressive use of an understanding of the properties of gold. Now, in Bush Barrow, which is probably the most technically advanced example of the technique, we have this drawing from the beginning of the 19th century. During the excavation, we don't know if they found it so well preserved. Today, we have very few pieces, but on the other hand, we have this tremendous technology that allows us microscopically to see very closely the technique. And so we see this mosaic arrangement, this very dense arrangement. And an interesting part, which has been observed, of course, in the past, is that all these designs are made by recessions in the wood. So they are making recessions in the wood. And so the different depths create the illusion of a zigzag pattern. That's very impressive indeed. Now, the size of the studs is really staggering. Okay, they're much smaller than the Mycenaean. They're 0.4 of a millimeter, the smallest of them. Most of them are 0.5 to 1.5, in diameter 0.3 to 0.7 of a millimeter, so less than half a millimeter. You cannot really see them with naked eye. The gold is probably natural alloys, around 90% of gold with quantities of silver and copper, so they're harder than the Mycenaean examples. Their morphology, here these are nail-shaped, they're not L-shaped like the Mycenaeans, but they have the same diagonal here lines, but they are much thicker and much more solid. And this, according to all the scholars who have studied them, suggests that they were made by the technique of block twisting. Block twisting is a technique according to which the goldsmith takes a solid piece of gold, probably of square section, and then twists it until it becomes a wire. You can see the stages. And here, in this piece from Saint-Adrien, you can see the edges of a piece that was not very well processed. In some other pieces, you can see, and that's really very interesting, the tool that cut these gold studs from small, bigger, longer wires. Now, these, like in the Mycenaean technique, these studs were inserted in pre-drilled holes, again, very well, very densely placed and very well made. And in some of these destroyed pieces that we love so much, we can see how they inserted the wood here, from Saint-Fiacre to Saint-Marguerite. And in the lower pictures, you can see the similarities between the Bush Barrow example and another example at Dendra. Now, in one piece in Saint-Marguerite, Christian Elouer managed to identify, I'm not sure if this is the piece, this is my impression that that was the piece when I studied it in the National Museum of France. She identified what appears to be like an organic glue, and when she analyzed that, she found that it had the composition of an animal or fish glue. And Jacques Briard has said anyway that it would be impossible to keep these studs in place without glues. As for the quantities, like in Mycenaean Greece, these very often the excavators found thousands of these studs on the ground because the organic material has disintegrated. And here you can see here the Bush Barrow in the Park of Vaudin. Usually in France they found 6,000 to 8,000. This is what the reports say. In Bush Barrow, the idea is that there were more than 100,000. This may be, according to Orfield's idea, this may be an overestimation. So here we can see the similar video, starting from a solid square piece of gold. Akis Goumas is twisting these by hand. And again, like in the, but you can see here that it is completely different reaction of the gold. And then he has to roll it between hard surfaces in order to become solid. But as you will see, it becomes really solid piece of wire. Here it is. Okay, and then he uses a chisel in order to cut these tiny pieces that will become eventually the stud. And here you can get an idea of the size. They're really like mosquitoes, you cannot see them. Then he drills the wood. This easier because wood is softer, but with this tool, he will speak about them in a moment. And he used the same tool in order to apply the glue. That was an extremely difficult part, to grab these really non-visible pieces and place them in the holes. This is another, please pay attention to this tool because he will speak. This is hollow inside, not very much hollow, yeah. Now, the second difficulty was the glue, because the glue is just 1 or 2 drops, no more than that. But in this scale, 1 drop, as you can see in this shot, is like a huge wave and really distract the work. And at the beginning, of course, you know, we didn't know how much glue to put. So this is very much a matter of experience. And after he placed all the studs in the holes, the question was how he can secure them. So he used this initially this small hammer, then the same tool that we saw earlier, I told you to remember, and these places them deeper and also gives them a round shape. And this is a big question, how the Wessex and the Armorican parts have so perfect heads. And here you can see how this works. And now see how it looks before it is burnished and how its appearance will completely change with burnishing. Okay, so I didn't try here to reproduce whole ornament, just to understand, you know, again, the sequence of movement. Now, the technique, as we said, is attested mostly in this area, in what is known as Côte d'Armor in French, and chronological. So it seems that that was the place where it was invented, and from there probably exported to other places, possibly as a technique to England as well. Now, chronological will be very quick because that's an extremely complicated topic, and there are much more experts than me here to discuss, but Stuart Needham, back in the 2000s, he had proposed a type of chronology for this that goes from 2200 to 1500. There were once the tumuli, the Armorican tumuli that have this kind of decoration are the categories 1, 2, 3, and 4 that goes until the 17th century. Now, the Bush Barrow and Wessex one clusters here on the 1800s, and then Wessex 2, to which Hammeldon Down belongs, may go down even to the 16th century. Now, when that's the type of chronology, or type of chronologies are always problematic. If we go to C14 dating, Clement Nikolas has gathered all these dates, and he has isolated the ones that are reliable for many methodological reasons, and two of them belong to our tumuli, the tumuli that have given gold sub-decoration, and they cluster around this, the 22nd century, the 18th century. So we have the Armorican tumuli there. For Wessex one now, there are very few actual C14 dates. One of them from West Overton Barrow G1 gives a very similar date. And this is interesting because before C14 dates, scholars argued that the Armorican tumuli were contemporary with Wessex one. And then I at least managed to find, I'm sure that there may be others from the transition Wessex 1 to 2 context, which is quite wide, but indicative because we have the Hammeldon Down, which is probably the latest example of this technique. The synchronism is really a nightmare. I have here a chart published by Sabine Gerloff, where she suggests that Wessex 2 is roughly contemporary with the beginning of the late Bronze Age, which is this in Greece, where we have the earliest examples, because the question is, if there could have been a context from a chronological point of view, I will not bother you more, but I will say that if there could have been a context, this content could have been here. And this is a chronology based on old chronologies I mean before the new calibration curve, which was published in INCAL 2020, which will change quite a lot of our understanding, but this will take time. Now, if we want to compare the two techniques, we will see that in both they were using wires. Okay, difference in details, but it's more or less the same thing. The form differs, of course, nail-shaped, L-shaped in Greece. The application is really identical. We have seen that there is nothing to comment. And also in the design, okay, there is the cultural difference of rectilinear or curvilinear, but otherwise there is this idea of creating designs with the gold bars. The only difference is when it comes to the type B decoration in Mycenaean Greece in the 15th century, where they create a gold plateau all over the artifact, and then they decorate this by engraving. So we're not speaking for an identical technique, so it's difficult to speak about direct transfer, but we have a similar concept, we have similar context, very rich of probably chiefly burials, and we have similar typology with thrusting weapons. Of course, the distance is huge, and it is extremely difficult to fill the gaps. And I couldn't see a direct transfer by any means. I could only, indirect transfer of technological knowledge, whether this took place by men or by other means, like epics. You may all be familiar with description of Achilles' shield in the Iliad. I'm sure there are other similar descriptions in other epics. We cannot say. This is, of course, not the only piece of evidence for context. The most convincing piece of evidence comes from amber, the distribution of amber, and in particular, amber spaces with complex boring, which are attested in England, and some of them close to Stonehenge, and also in Mycenae and other sites in Greece. But apart from them, there are also attested in other places like central South Germany and Switzerland. These are slightly later chronologically, and perhaps also in Brittany. Now, another piece of evidence which is interesting is the metal inlay. Recently, Daniel Berger from Mannheim and colleagues, they studied this Thun Rensenbull axe from Switzerland, and they suggested that they are made according to the double damascening technique, a version of metal inlay, which was also used at the earliest example at Mycenae. And they also brought to the attention of scholars this fragmentary piece with also metal inlay from the Koskirik tumulus, again in the armory, which is earlier. So there may be, again, some connection here. And if we place all the maps together, amber spaces, objects with metal inlay, and with gold-stud decoration, we'll see that all of them, they have this Brittany element here. So this may be an important factor, apart from Wessex, in the equation, if there was an equation. And my impression is that if we are in future to find something, we'll find in this part of the world, in southern Germany and the area north of the Alps. The area perhaps where the big river routes meet in Europe. And the river routes have been always important. We know from the Neolithic that there was the huge circulation of this spondylus shell ornaments between the Aegean and the English Channel along the river routes. So this exchange didn't have any rational explanation. It happened as a prestige exchange, because long-term exchange is something that gave prestige to people. Now, if we have to look for a more rational explanation for why the Mycenaeans may have contacted a place like so distant like England or Northwest France, then we have to look at tin. And both Cornwall and Brittany are very rich in tin. Tin bronzes were in use at the beginning of their use in the second millennium. And, we know that Cornwall was a source of tin for Greece in archaic or classical times. And also recent studies have shown that some tin ingots in Haifa may have been made with tin from Cornwall. So there may be a case of some kind of communication there, but we cannot show any. So let me now go to the most important part and the last part of this talk, which is about the craftsman, the tools and the technique. And I will kindly ask Akis to continue, but I will continue through your slides. Please, Akis.
Good evening. I also want to thank David Dawson and all the panelists for inviting us here. My talk will be short. I want to explain to you that my task when I work with archaeologists with these research projects is to identify, to trace tool marks on the surface of the materials, and then guess the shape of the tool. And then from when I make the tool, I try to learn how to use it and all the information I can gain from this to reconstruct the final object or the final technique. But also we are looking, I want to gain as much information I can about the prehistoric craftsman. So I want to focus in our technique, this unbelievable Mycenaean technique, the gold embroidery. We have spent hours, days, months to understand this technique, and we still have questions about it. But from my point of view, I'll explain what is behind all these videos Nikolas showed you. And the first is the first tool which I started is the drill, because the most important part of this technique are the holes. So we studied a mountain microscope to see details of the holes, and then with also we studied all these gold bars. Finally, I made many trials with the different drills. You saw some of them in the video, but because they couldn't keep the sharpness of the edges, I had to make a special hard alloy, bronze alloy with 16% of the tin. This drill worked perfect because it could keep the sharpness of the edges. And when we saw them, the similarities under the microscope, we saw that they're very similar one another. The next tool which we use for this technique is, may I put it from a different way? We had to make these gold bars from stripes of gold leaf. The question is how to cut these thin stripes. I want to tell you that the thickness of the gold leaf was 0.1 of a millimeter, and the width is about 1 millimeter. So I had to try to make many cutting scissors. Some of them worked and some not. But because at the last stage, I wanted a very, very thin cutting chisel, but very hard, I also made another alloy with a hard alloy with 16% tin. And the question was, does the chisel have a straight line head or curvy? So I had to make many experiments to understand how it works. And also I made the handle, which helped me to use this tool as extension of my hand. This, for me, it was very important to understand how to use it. So I had the best results. So at the next, you can see the results, how easy it is from experiments where we compare them with studs from Bush Barrow, how it cut them very easily, and see the similarities between the two, the experimental part and the one from the original part. They are very, very similar. The next step was, okay, we have made these small gold bars, but they are very, very small. We couldn't, how to put them on the holes, how to use them. We couldn't do it with the fingers, so I had to make tweezers. And but there was I faced a difficulty in the beginning because it slipped. These very small pieces slipped away. So I had to make grooves at the edges of the tweezers, just so I could control them very well to put them in the holes. Before putting the holes, I added a very small drop of animal glue, of organic glue, to keep it in place, in the hole. When I filled all the holes, as you saw it in the video, with this golden bars, I let about 1 hour to 2 hours to let the glue dry, and then with the tool which you see on the left below, I pressed these gold bars in the place, in the holes, and aligned them one side by side with the other bars. Then I put a thin layer of organic glue on top. I let it dry for more than 4 to 5 hours. And then with a very well polished bronze burnisher, I flattened the surface as you saw it on the video. And now I had I prepared it to engrave it. But to engrave it with what? This was a question for me. I studied the marks on the grooves, and I saw that the V-shaped grooves. But I had to take care that I didn't want to cut it because the metal was very thin and soft. So I made this engraver with slightly curved head, but not very sharp. And with a very gentle gesture, I tried to first to mark the curve on the surface of the gold, and then slowly to engrave it. Something which is very important for this technique are the precision of the holes. This means that we had to make the holes close one another, and also to stabilize, to keep the drill very stable, because if it's not stable, then it damages the other holes. So we couldn't use a bow drill. It was another way to use this drill. But when Nikos brought the idea that in South England or North France, they have craftsmen who were using a similar technique like this, we read that from Corfield mentioned that they also found 2 owl tips made out of bronze, and we saw that they were very similar with the tips of our drill. The difference is that our tip has a thickness of 0.4 of a millimeter, and from Bush Barrow they have 0.2 of a millimeter. And there is a question, what was the alloy of these bow drills with these tips? So here we can see the similarities between the two techniques, that they look very, very similar, very close. And also when we see them on the side cuts, we see a small difference, that the Mycenaean ones sometimes were longer, and that the ones from Bush Barrow and other places are fit perfect with the studs. Maybe this was a way to make the heads easier on the studs. It was magic when you see this technique under the microscope, and you could identify the craftsmanship and the dexterity of the engraver, and also that he used a very well fine polished engraving tool. If you see our work, you can understand that we have a long way to go. We have many things to learn, to reach. I don't know if you can reach his level, but to understand him better. The thing which, from a point of view of a craftsman, I can understand that both craftsmen have an order in their mind. Because the Mycenaean craftsman filled all the space with these gold bars, but in some places like here, he made some gaps and then he filled them with smaller pieces of smaller gold bars. And on the right, you can see where the two orientations of the bars meet. Then also he makes some corrections. You know, and from the other point of view, from the craftsmen from the Bush Barrow and other places. They have very well organized the linear pattern, all the zigzag pattern. And in my mind, there is a question, how they could do it to have so even, so similar stud head. The heads of the studs were so similar. So as you saw in the video, we made some experiments. I used this very well balanced bronze hammer to nail them in the wood. And then with a tool which you see down on the left, I use this tool also to press the heads of the studs in the hole and turn it left and right to mark the circle on the surface. Maybe if this tool can be developed, maybe we could have a result like this. And then, because this tool makes the surface a bit curvy, I use a varnisher to make it flat to look like the ones we saw from Bush Barrow. Because of the very small dimensions of all this work, I use magnifying lenses and also a very good microscope. Sometimes I can't see the details also with lenses, and I see them on the screen of the computer. On the right, you can see the dimension, how small they are. Also, you can see, as you saw, Nico showed them also before, the sizes. They are, when do you match them with when you see them side by side with matches. And here I want to tell you something. Some years ago, when our daughter was the age of 15 or 16, she came with me and played with these tools, make it in a very much more easier than I could do to make this golden rods, make the holes, as she could control all these small dimensions very easy. So I think I agree with the opinion that maybe young boys or girls could do this work, because if a child which is grown up in a workshop, in a family workshop from the age of 6 to the age of 12 or 13, he could be a very good craftsman. He could manage these techniques. And here we have a picture from workshop of medieval times, where two young boys, one is a kid on the left and the other is a boy, working with the old craftsman. And here's a detail, that the kid here draws a wire from a draw plate. This happens also now, because when a young boy or girl goes to a workshop to learn a technique, the craftsman gives him, instead of making coffee or clean the space, they ask them to draw wires from the draw plates. It's a tradition, maybe. Thank you very much.
And before we let you, so we apologize for the long talk, but I hope it was interesting. We have to thank a lot of museums which allowed us to study material in the spaces and facilitated our work. And because the museums are not only buildings, but also people, we have to thank all these people who are listed here. I will not name them, all of them, but we're grateful to all of them, as well as to the British School of Athens for partly funding this research. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nikolas and Akis. That wow, I think I speak for everyone when I just say the word wow. What incredible insights you've given us into gold working from two completely opposite sides of the of Europe. Now I am, so my name is Matthew Knight. I'm the meeting secretary for the Prehistoric Society. And we are very lucky tonight to have a panel of three researchers who look at gold from lots of different angles, and we're going to have about 15 minutes getting their reflections on the talk we've just heard from lots of different perspectives, and then I'll be handing back to David to get questions from the audience, and I'm sure there's lots here. So the panel we have with us tonight is Alison Sheridan of National Museum Scotland, Barbara Armbruster of University of Toulouse, and Chris Standish from University of Southampton. I wonder, Barbara, if you might kick us off with your thoughts on this, particularly with your experience as a gold worker yourself.
Yeah, thank you, Matt. Of course, first of all, I would like to thank very warmly both Nikos and Akis for their presentation. It's fascinating. For me, it's the second time, but I still discover things that I didn't appreciate in the first thing I saw. So it's really, really great. What I wanted to ask, as you said, who was first? So there is this technique that seems to be developed first in the West, so in Wessex and Armorica, probably Armorica, as there are more places. Would you agree that we can turn around an expression that says ex Oriente lux into ex Occidente lux for this period? This was raised by Sabine Gerloff and other scholars. So I wanted to know whether you agree, Nikolas.
I agree. Sabine Gerloff is right on that. She has done this quite forcefully, I have to say. And my only comment is that when you do this something so forcefully, you don't sometimes realize the problems that come with this change directive, because there are problems that arise there as well. And we'll have to deal with these problems as well, which are not only chronological, but are also, problems of synchronism, because Gerloff's work is very much based on synchronism of typochronology. So what we're missing here is a very big program of C14 dates to start seeing if what we believe, I agree with her in the conventional chronology thing, but we need really, I read recently Stockhammer's et al. Thing where he challenges quite a lot of the synchronism. So we need a huge pan-European program of C14 dating, I'm afraid. Or I hope, but I'm afraid.
That's fine. Can I continue?
Oh, yes.
There are still more practical things. Well, first of all, of course, I'm somebody very interested in experimental archaeology, which I do myself since 40 years, and also combining ethno-archaeology to experimental archaeology, and dealing with technical terms and technical questions in archaeology for producing something. These means like experiment and ethnography are very, very important. So I really appreciate that in the collaboration of you, Nikos, but also Eleni and Akis, you have such a, how do you say, a regard croisé, we say in French. So crossing a look on the objects and the things. And it seems that in your case, you really understand each other, because it's not always the case that archaeologists accept what artisans would say. So this is a really advantage in your group and in your joint venture, your joint work. So what I wanted to look at are the tools. Last time when I listened to Akis some a week ago, he told about tools to use, and I made a comment, but I couldn't explain it. It's about the use of antler as tools in prehistoric times. And I've worked on the first gold of mankind in Varna, in Bulgaria, for instance, and other places. And antler tools are not always, but sometimes part of the archaeological evidence. And I tried it in my workshop, and I used it for plastic shaping techniques in in really giving shape to something or in decorating. So I made punches and hammers and anvils. And there is an Irish colleague whose name is Brian Clark, and he worked later Bronze Age and early Iron Age objects, which are called in Britain ribbon talks. And he did this also with antler tools. So this is something I think Akis could try.
Yes.
And I can say it's very efficient. And I also tried bone tools and compared their efficiency. And the bone tool after a certain time is falling apart. But the antler is more strength, has more strength and more continuity in the work.
Thank you very much. Yes, I read what you wrote in Harvard, and I'll find a piece of antler and I start working with it. Thank you very much for the information. Yes, it's very useful.
Okay, that's fine. So probably I'll leave now other questions to other participants.
Yeah, thank you both, because I think we're getting a glimpse of the sort of thing that must have happened in free history, where you've got two expert gold workers exchanging their knowledge and passing off tips. I think it's fascinating to listen to you both exchange ideas. Chris, would you like to say something about your work on provenance in gold and kind of the circulation of gold at this time, or any other thoughts you had off the back of Nikolas and Akis's talk?
Thank you, thanks, Matt. And yeah, thank you very much for that talk. It was really fascinating, and again, great to see the way you've brought in the experimental side of the work, which, from my perspective, is something that I'd kind of like to see more of in my own work. I think the thing that jumped out at me about the actual gold was the composition that you mentioned, and you highlighted that it's very pure gold, and that it was probably refined in some way. And I think that shows perhaps another big difference to the Armorican and Wessex objects that you were looking at, because that's very, very different to what we see over here, and there's probably no refining stage. It very much matches the sort of composition of natural gold. So that's perhaps another distinction between the two the workshops, I guess. But I think I'm quite interested in whether is that common for gold work from this period and region, or does it stand out for your objects as well?
No, it's not common. That's why it is strange. I mean, the actual funny, let's say, thing is that when Hartmann had analyzed the piece that is in Copenhagen back in the 80s, it gave a result of, almost 100%. And we were saying, okay, this is probably a mistake. And when we did this, and we did it with two different devices, because even when we did it, we didn't believe it. We said, no, it's impossible. So we did it with another device, and again, it gave 99%. And we said, okay, we have to believe the things. So no, it's very uncommon. And this is what I asked Barbara in a conference we met, do you know this kind of things? Then I read Craddock's quite a lot of writing, and Jack Ogden also sent us quite a lot of feedback on that. And there is all this, not really refining, but this copper depletion, as they call it. And Akis can tell you, because we tried this experimentally. So I will not carry on. Akis, if you want to say a few words on that.
Yes, but it happens when we have a thin gold leaf. So I made an experiment. I had one gold with proportions of copper is about 10% of copper and 90% of gold. A very thin gold leaf, a thickness about 0.3 of a millimeter. And I tested it with fire by annealing it, and then I put it in a mixture of vinegar, salt, and stipteria and alum. So after 2 weeks, I was trying it every day, three times a day. And after 2 weeks, I wanted to brought it to Democritus, and they found that from the 10% of copper, they found the copper close less than 2%. So I think that it is a familiar technique to the craftsman, because they anneal it many times in order to work with it or to hammer it or make it thinner. And maybe they learned it from this procedure. Because if they want to hammer, they have to put it in maybe in some chemicals or something like this. And they understand that by annealing it, they bring the copper on the surface of the material. This is why it becomes dark. So when they clean it, they take some of the copper off. So when you repeat it for many times, but you have to anneal it with a blowpipe, not with a torch. So you must use a very soft flame, and slowly, and day by day, the color of the surface of the gold changes, and from dark brown gray it becomes light brown, and sometimes it doesn't change. So you understand that it's close to 22 karat for me as a craftsman. And when we brought to Democritus, it changed a lot. But the thing is that the other piece which we had silver, we couldn't clean the silver. We couldn't take the silver out. Maybe it's something which needs a different technique. I read that they used salts, but it didn't work.
But if you allow me to answer very briefly, what Akis said is that very soft gold would be extremely useful for all the process of bending to make this L shape. And perhaps this explains, but to answer directly your question, no, it's extremely uncommon.
The other knowledge, something which I couldn't understand before, is that I could understand the difference of the quality of the gold through playing it in the air like this. The small piece, it was more flexible than the first time. I understood this difference.
So perhaps this was a sort of a deliberate choice because of the type of, well, the application of the gold. There was this extra or greater processing stage that was required for these objects, and that's why they are contrasting to others in the area. Did you want to say something on that, Barbara? I saw you put your hand up before.
Yeah, I would like to. Do you hear me?
Yes. Yeah.
So, in the early Bronze Age, or even earlier in the Bell Beaker period, in southern France, there are objects which are also very, very high in gold content, and it was Bernard Gratus from the archaeometry laboratory in Orléans who did laser ablation coupled to mass spectrometry, and he found out that it's quite pure. And we were wondering why, because in other cases in Europe, when pure gold objects appeared, like the Dendra sword, or even a disc, an early Bronze Age disc from Mordorf in Germany, it was said by Ernst Pernitzka that it must be fakes. But I'm sure that rarely, but in nature, you could find quite high gold natural alloys that you could treat, as it was said by Akis, but not for the copper content, which is normally very low in these natural alloys, but to take out the silver. And there was a cementation process that was showed by Mr. Wunderlich from Halle, who did a cementation on thin gold foils, and he took out the silver. So it is possible.
Yeah, and there certainly are deposits that do have very low silver contents. I know of some. I don't know anything about Greek gold, but I know in Britain that there are deposits that sort of have median silver concentrations of 0.2%, so very, very pure. So yeah, they do exist. So it wouldn't require too much of a processing stage to make them as pure as what we're kind of seeing here. But yeah.
And can I bring in you, Alison, on this and your thoughts on this as well?
I'd just like to echo the comments of the previous speaker, how fantastic the work that you've done is, and how valuable is the expertise that you have, Akis, and all of the insights that you've been able to bring to this. I just take my hat off to you. And of course, between you, you've posed this $64,000 question. Was this a case of technical transfer from Northwest Europe to Greece or not? If so, how could it have been done? And we are very lucky to have in the audience Kate Verkoyen, who did a PhD about the amber spacer plate necklaces, and she's done a fantastic job there of explaining the nuances. So not all amber spacer plates necklaces will have originated in Wessex, of course. They were making them in Central Europe as well. But it seems, indubitable that there was some objects made it from southern England to Greece. We can't deny that. And at the same time, we know from Denmark, for example, that there are these massively long distance movements of materials. So you have amber from Denmark making it down south. You have Mesopotamian gold glass beads making it as far as Denmark, slightly later. So in theory, it's not impossible. But there are these differences. So yes, you've got the differences in the gold, you've got the differences in the shapes of the tiny little pins. Is it conceivable that there could have been independent invention of this, given that we know that the gold workers in Mycenae were incredibly skilled? And I don't know enough about Near Eastern gold work at the time. But presumably you have looked into this and you have ruled out the possibility of any kind of influence from Mesopotamia, or other Near Eastern gold working traditions at the time, have you?
Not in the way that you mean it, not this exhaustive thing, but we will do that. But everybody else who did before really said, I have asked all the colleagues I know working in Egypt, and they haven't told me that they know anything similar. Of course, I have to say that this is a very difficult technique to identify, because the gold thing is heavily and very easily covered entirely by copper oxidization. So you may not even see it. If we didn't have Maria Kondaki, who is the conservator in our team, who said, let's make an X-ray here. We have found things only by X-ray. So we would have found probably half of them. And these after 3 or 4 years of study. So I see that Jack Ogden says that there are no Near Eastern examples. He said something else that I couldn't see. So yeah, my impression is, my understanding is that the Mycenaeans in their earlier part, and that is now historical, before the destruction of the Minoan palaces, which opened the path to the Near East, they didn't have so much access to the Near East. And so they looked very much to Europe. Culturally, in my understanding, culturally, they belonged much more to the tumulus cultures of the Middle Bronze Age Europe than to the world of the Eastern Mediterranean, to the urban societies of the Eastern Mediterranean. I'm speaking about the 17th or the 16th century. So culturally, they were more attached to that. And they have very clear relations, and we have worked also in gold work with the Carpathian Basin, which also is rich in metals and gold. So we still have a lot to learn. The problem is that looking at this kind of connections, as you said very well, and as you know from even earlier periods, okay, you don't have the kind of evidence that you have when you have trade relations. You will have very thin relations. So perhaps we need to develop a new model of thinking how these relations may have been working.
Matt, may I say something to Alison?
If it's very quick, I'm conscious that we need to give the audience the chance to ask questions.
I want to say that I feel very lucky collaborating with archaeologists, because I have learned so many things which I couldn't learn as a goldsmith or maker. It was for me a great opportunity from life to work with them.
I think that's a wonderful note to actually end the panel discussion on this. There's clearly so much to be learned from this collaboration between archaeologists and the people who understand the materials. I just want to thank our panelists and Nikolas and Akis again, and I'll hand over to David, who will chair questions from the audience.
Thank you, Matthew. So we've got a few questions have come in. I think people have been spellbound by the presentation and the discussion, because this this really is absolutely fascinating stuff. So I'd like to pick up on something that Alison talked about, but Malcolm has said, could there possibly have been contact between Wessex, Armorican, Mycenae by sea? And just to amplify that, then I'm thinking, I think in the 16th century BC, there's tin from Cornwall found to the east of Cyprus, so in a shipwreck. So is it possible those contacts, as Nikolas has said, is sort of based on tin, but is actually by sea rather than overland across Europe?
The evidence for the tin ingots, which are found in Haifa and has been analyzed by Brittany and colleagues, they are mostly on the 13th century, perhaps 14th, but I think 13th. So they are in a period which we tend to examine the late Bronze Age as one thing, but it's not one thing. The 14th and the 13th century is not the same thing as the 16th and the 15th. So now we are in the 16th and the 15th and the 17th. And so I cannot see that there is even the navigation capacity to do this kind of thing. I cannot even see that Cornish tin needs to come by sea all the way. It can come to Italy overland and then from there by sea to, I mean, these are things that, you know, we really cannot say at this stage. I mean, it's just deductions or assumptions.
Thank you. And Emma has said, where does the gold in Mycenae come from? And can I divert and also ask Chris if he'd like to say something about where the gold in the Bush Barrow studs came from?
Yeah, shall I start with that about the Bush Barrow? Yeah. So it is quite difficult to answer these kind of questions in terms of where gold comes from. But we have looked at one of the pins from the Bush Barrow gold and fitting it into a larger study of a lot more objects from both Ireland and Britain. It seems like the Bush Barrow gold is part of the same metal pool that's circulating in the early Bronze Age. And at the moment, the most viable source appears to be southwest England. So we're talking about Cornwall. There's quite a large ore field there that we've already been talking about, that many people believe is one of the key sources of tin in the early Bronze Age. And you find alluvial gold in the same sediments, the same river deposits as the tin. So Bronze Age miners, if you want to call them miners, would absolutely have been encountering gold in Cornwall if they were also encountering tin. And so that was certainly playing a large component. And the fact that the composition of both the Bush Barrow pin and other objects in this area are consistent with this suggests that is the most likely source at the moment. So yeah, that's the Bush Barrow gold at least. And I'll pass over to someone else to comment on the Greek objects.
As you said, Chris, it's extremely difficult to provenance gold, so I'm not aware of any work that has been done. The sources in Greece are very few. In Macedonia, there are some, but there are sources around. So there are sources in Western Anatolia. Okay, so in Asia Minor. There are sources, of course, in the Balkans and the Carpathian Basin. And then, of course, there is gold from Egypt. but there are many sources around which can be, and gold, I mean, for all these things that we saw, you need just a piece of, a bar of an ingot of gold. Gold is easy to transfer, but it's extremely difficult to provenance. So the work that Chris is doing is hugely important. I mean, if you manage to find a way to really provenance gold, that would be fantastic.
Okay, and thank you. And someone called Generator has picked up on the age of the people who may have made these objects. So Akis talked about sort of young people having better eyesight. There was, and you highlighted, and Nikolas highlighted a newspaper article, and it was, and I know where this came from because I was involved. The journalist literally phoned up an eye specialist to tell him what he thought, and got the eye specialist to agree that it was likely that this really detailed work was done by young children, sort of aged between sort of 8 and 14. Akis, do you think that's correct?
It's not scientific opinion, it's my opinion.
Certainly not.
But in practice, I think, because I work with also the children, and also I work with blind people sometimes. And it's not only the eyes, it's only the feeling of the thumbs helps very well, this very small dimensions. So I believe that if a child grows up in a workshop, from the age of 6 or 7, after 5 years working in the workshop, he can be a very good craftsman, and he can manage these qualities. Because as I was using my lenses when I worked, when my daughter was 15, she could see better than my eyes with the lenses. And also she had a very good feeling with her fingers. And she's not, she hasn't worked with me. Try to imagine a kid with all the days in workshop, then maybe in less than 3-4 years, he could be an expert in this. And if the knowledge comes from the repetition. If he does this work for many years and repeats, then sometimes he can go more than we can believe. Like, you can get deeper to the technique. So I believe that, yes, they were made from young people, boys or girls.
May I say something? Yeah. I don't think so. I think that were myop people. Do you say myop? That,
myopic.
Yeah. For instance, in my workshop, I take off my glasses to work very close to what I do, and I see it in an augmented way. And it was already argued in the 80s for the carving of cylinder seals. It was in a journal from the Penn Museum in Pennsylvania, in Philadelphia. And they called their article "Close Work Without Magnifying Lenses?" A question mark in Expedition magazine. And their hypothesis was that minute work was done by myop people. And another proposition was the use of real lenses. There are rock crystal lenses in Turkey, in Troy, and other places. And so probably lenses existed, but I think it was really myop people, and why not also young people. But I really recommend to see this article. I can send it to you and to read what they propose. It's very convincing.
Thank you.
Can I add something very quickly? Concerning this, Barbara, yeah, I mean, there is also a very interesting article in EJA in 1999 by Plagos, who discussed the myopic, which is also interesting. We can discuss, but what I wanted to raise is that the crucial thing that we don't discuss usually, the crucial thing for acquiring this kind of techniques in craftsmanship is repetition. It's not talent. It's doing the same thing thousands of times by day. And there is where you need a young child. A young child, I mean 7 years old, 8 years old. Because at 7 years old and 8 years old children, they like to repeat things. And I remember once I was doing an experiment, a different experiment, And we had a child, and she saw this, and she was so, I want to do this thing with a bow drill. So I gave her the bow drill with some sand, and she was working that for 3 hours without speaking. And then she said, sorry, I have to go to take lunch, and I will come back. So they love to repeat things. So you cannot do this thing when you are 16. You get very easily bored. So we should also consider this thing. I mean, that's neither a scientific idea, but yeah.
Okay, thank you. Now, and Tess has said, do you think that the craftspeople saw something and then copied it using their own technique, sort of inventing it themselves, having seen it, hence the different wire making techniques, although it produces a similar visual effect?
My feeling is that, you know, this is something that has been told now in an epic. Somebody's, narrating an epic. A king has gone somewhere and said, the King of England has this kind of fantastic, sword, and it is just, you have to make something like that. I cannot imagine that a craftsman have really seen the Bush Barrow example, because then he would make it the same way. But he has listened about this exceptional technique that is made of very small things. I don't know what Akis believes, but this is my feeling. I mean,
I don't know, but maybe it's a result of observation of the nature too. That no, I can't have an idea. But I think that when they started the first steps of this, the first stage of this technique, which they made only lines by putting the gold bars side by side. I think that for a craftsman who is talented, could develop this technique, who could work this technique and say, okay, I want to do it in my way. I want to do something which haven't happened again. And I believe that there is a meeting point where the skill meets the creative imagination. And I believe to this, that some people, some time, they develop something which someone else couldn't do it. So maybe it was the development of the first stages and someone said, okay, I cover all the space. Because the stages before is decoration. They found a way to decorate the hilts. And maybe someone else said, okay, I'll cover all of it. And try to find a way to cover, but it's only a personal opinion. It's not, I'm a craftsman.
David, just because it comes from Jack Ogden, who it was his comment earlier, he had written, and I couldn't see by the scene now, that if one European example reached Greece, a smart goldsmith could work it out and copy and improve. I say because Jack knows gold work better than anybody, so it's important to.
Okay, I think we'll just have time for just two more questions. One from Jack, just picking up one of his points. Akis, you showed you were using metal and stone tools, and Barbara had talked about antler ones. What is your feeling about the tools that were used, the materials?
When I tried to work with a material, I tried to find also the tools which are familiar to the materials. I mean, friendly. This means that when the tool doesn't harm the surface of the material. So with my short experience, I tried to see what was the best material to work with thin gold leaves. And I found out, I tried with the copper and bronze, and I saw that it leaves marks on the surface of the material. So I feel that it was not friendly. And by practicing, I practiced with the different qualities of wood. It didn't work so well because also the wood didn't work so well. And I found out that that the bone was working better. I didn't know about the antler because we don't have this tradition here. We have to, now I found a piece of antler, so after Barbara told me, to make some tools and see similarities, or if it is better or not. But for me, it's only it's a deep feeling when you work with a so soft and so kind material, the gold leaf. You have to find a material which is very friendly to it. So serves the idea better. It's difficult to explain it. But for me, also about the hammers or the other tools, I have it in mind always to use materials which are friendly with the other materials. Except if you want to make a damage, if you want to destroy them. But if you want the metal to serve your idea, must be very kind to it. You have to be very friendly to it. And mostly with this, the beauty of the thin gold leaf.
Okay, thank you. And last question from Andy and Sarah. This might be something Alison would like to comment on. We've seen what appears to be a mature technique. Are there any precursors? Putting you on a bit on the spot there, Alison, because I have one in mind.
Crikey. Oh, well, yeah, there's two questions. Are there any precursors within Greece? How revolutionary was this technique within Greek goldworking techniques and traditions? And are there any precursors for Armorica or Southwest England? Not really. Well, the earliest use of gold with us tends to be a sheet gold technique. You have a lot of embossing. You have engraving of sheet gold. And so to make these little tiny pins is a slight, it's a divergence in the technique. But I think, the message is that these were fantastically sophisticated specialist gold workers that we're seeing in the early Bronze Age in both of these areas. And I think that Ben Roberts actually made a very good point. If it was technical or technological transfer, how could that be affected? And I think that plays into what you've been talking about. If you're a good enough gold worker and you were to see, say, an old early Bronze Age dagger that was either made in Brittany or made in southern England had made its way to Greece, would you actually then be able to copy it yourself, given that you have your skills already? And I think Akis could probably answer that.
Can I sort of ask that same question then of Barbara in terms of the Armorican material, and then I'll give my my thought as well, if I may.
So, well, the precursors of the goldwork are, as Alison said, sheet and also wire, but wire which is much thicker than the one used for the studs. So I don't see any right connection. And as a goldsmith myself, I ask myself for the Greek material. Why did they do it if they cover the whole surface? I see the sense to make a motif, a pattern, which gives a polychrome or bichrome effect with a wood or another support material. But why doing it this complicated and time-consuming way if you can make a sheet and just cover your pommel or what you have? So I don't know.
Okay, I'll just give my pennyworth, which is that I always think of the earlier Bronze Age daggers dating essentially to about 2400 BC. We have one from Fyodine, which have the handle is set with bronze studs, much larger, very different, but it's actually not really bronze. The one I'm thinking of is copper, or the beryl racton. And whether there's a tradition there of studying dagger handles with studs that then is followed through later into gold working, but different material clearly. So Nikolas,
but may I say one thing?
Of course.
I had the opportunity to study a gold dagger from the royal cemeteries of Ur in Mesopotamia in the Penn Museum in Philadelphia. And there is a kind of studying, while the studs are how to say, like a boss coming out of the material. But of course, there's like a nail going into the wood. And this is in the mid of the 3rd millennium BC. And when I saw this, I immediately thought about Wessex and Armorican. And then I thought it's impossible to get from Ur in Mesopotamia to Wessex. So probably such kind of things can also appear on different places.
Nikos or Akos?
No, we don't have any precursor in Greece, apparently. I just wanted to note my feeling for the Armorican and Wessex examples. I mean, the Barrow example is not the best because it's very elaborate. But if we see the Armorican examples, the whole idea was to decorate the outline. So we should look to something like that. Did they have anything to decorate the outline of the handle? This is what they were interested in initially, and then they elaborated on that. What looks also extremely strange to me is the Hammeldon Down amber pommel. That's completely out of any pattern there. And I cannot really understand how they managed to do this on the amber. That's fantastic. But yeah, this is what I wanted to say, yeah.
But may I still say something? I studied a little applique, a tiny piece of gold decorative element for a scepter or another organic support. And there are 4 holes in each one. 1 hole in each corner, and there is still a little nail that was used to fix this little gold plate. And I took off the nail, and it has the same technique and the same look like these studs from Armorica and Wessex. So probably first people made little nails and fixed something, and then they saw that it makes an effect, and then they started to use it in a decorative way. Okay. This will be published very soon, so I'll send it to everybody.
Right. So thank you everyone. I think we'll call it a night there. It's 9:20, so we got on for nearly 2 hours. So really had a fantastic talk from Nikos and Akis. I can't thank you enough for your talk, and thank you very much to to Alison, Barbara, and Chris for being on the panel, and Matthew and the Prehistoric Society for being co-organizers of the session. And thank you very much for attending. And perhaps you might think of joining the Prehistoric Society if you're not already a member, or even the Wiltshire Archaeological and Natural History Society, particularly if you're more local to here. So with that, I say a very big thank you to you all, and good night, and come to our next talks.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you
very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Goodbye.
Good night.